I'm here to challenge some of your potential assumptions about what a library is, given the new virtual landscape in which we all live. And I'm going to start off by illustrating it with a story about this manuscript, which is the Codex Sinaiticus. It's the earliest New Testament in the world. So all other copies of the New Testament are later than this one. And I want to take you to the 5th of July, 2009, which was the day before we completed a 5-year project to virtually reunify this earliest New Testament in the world. So the Codex Sinaiticus, it was in 4 different locations, and we had a project to digitize it and bring it back together again. There were some 18 or 19 fragments in St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Desert in Egypt. There are 43 leaves in Germany in the University of Leipzig Library. There are about 4 fragments in St. Petersburg in Russia in the National Library there. And there are 247 leaves in the British Library in London. And this project had gone on for 5 years. We'd digitized all the manuscript using the same equipment, took it to all the 4 different locations. And we also carried out a lot of translations and transcriptions. It's written in Greek, it's 4th century. So the translations were into Russian and to German and so on. But there was also transcriptions, because this wording, each of those words is the earliest version of the New Testament we have. And so this is the earliest transmittal of this text. As well as the transcription and the translations, we also looked at the physical thing, because it's written on vellum, which is animal skin. In the 19th century, Baron von Tischendorf said it was written on antelope. Well, is there antelope in Egypt? And so we did a sort of CSI forensic examination, whether to look into DNA. In fact, the way to tell what this parchment was, which animal it was by looking at the hair follicle patterns under high magnification. And it could have been cow, maybe it's sheep. The other thing we did was we looked at the ink. The inks can inform where it was written. So this is primary evidence, if you like. So we looked at the physicality of the thing. On the 5th of July, 2009, we were preparing the website at which the Codex Sinaiticus from its 4 different locations was going to be brought back together. And there was the translations, the transcriptions, there was all this examination of the physicality of the thing that had never been done before. On that day, on the 5th of July 2009, I was one of only 3 people alive who had seen that text, the Codex Sinaiticus, in all 4 locations. The 6th of July 2009, we then launched the website, and we watched over 24 hours as the website went live and there was all the publicity. And on that day, through the 24 hours, 20 million people saw the Codex Sinaiticus. And I give you this as an example of the virtual world as well as the physical world in which libraries are operating. And we created a new digital entity that you can do things with that you can't do with the physical. And yet the physical is incredibly important, because this is the original transmittal of the New Testament. And I'd suggest that what this raises is the whole question in this digital landscape, this virtual landscape, of what is a library? Is a library a cathedral to knowledge? So this is the long room here at Trinity College Dublin, my new institution, and it's been called the most beautiful room in Ireland. So is a library a cathedral to knowledge? Or is it more of a fantasy? Is it nostalgic fantasy? And some of you may recognize this as the Jedi Archive from Star Wars Episode 2. You might also recognize or note that there is a certain similarity to the previous slide. Or is a library a temple? This is the National Library of Bhutan, the Himalayan kingdom between China and India, which is known for the concept of gross domestic happiness. And the National Library of Bhutan is a temple. It's revered as a temple because there's a Buddhist shrine inside, because there are Buddhist sacred texts. These are the shelf marks, and the texts are Buddhist sutras and sacred texts. So this is a temple. Or perhaps a library is simply a warehouse, a dumping ground for this mass of stuff, the last resort for all this physical information. And coincidentally, libraries since the 1980s have been adapting warehouse technology for a lot of their storage buildings. So, for example, when I worked at the British Library, we built this building which was 26 meters high for 272 kilometers of stock. That's like going from London to, I don't know, Edinburgh. It's high bay, high density, automated. I've actually been on one of these. It's great fun to run up. This one is the University of Chicago, the Mansueto Library. Where we are, that's 5 stories underground. The books have been retrieved, taken up to the ground floor, to this beautiful nutshell of a building, within which is this delightful, beautiful, light reading room. And what's interesting here is a lot of people, particularly in the sciences, say the astrophysicists and engineers say, we don't use libraries. Well, firstly, the material that they're using, there is an organizing entity that is making sure that there's online access. But also, when I visited here, this was full of engineering, math, and medical students. So have a delightful space and people will use it. Or maybe a library isn't so much a warehouse of stuff. Maybe it's a warehouse of ideas, a storehouse of ideas. And here is the Ideas Store. This is the reinvention of the public libraries in Tower Hamlets in East London. This one's in East India Dock Road. There's another one in Bow and Canary Wharf. And these are a melding of learning, of entertainment, their ideas, stores. Maybe, perhaps, libraries are a symbol. And there are many, many countries that build signature buildings as their national libraries, as a symbol of their collective memory. This is spectacularly sited on the waterfront in Copenhagen. It's the Royal Library of Denmark. It's known colloquially as the Black Diamond. Maybe libraries are places to think palaces. When I worked at the British Library in London, they had a wonderful strapline, which was a place to think and a place to make you think. And the other thing that happened there was, as you saw on the previous slide, it's next door to St Pancras Eurostation, and then also Euston and King's Cross. And a lot of people actually use the library not to consult the material, but as a meeting place. So people would come down and you'd see a lot of business meetings happening in the communal rooms, in the restaurant, in the coffee shop. And maybe that's what a library is. Maybe it's more of a meeting room, a meeting place. And here in Ireland, in County Kildare, is the new library at Maynooth University. And if I pan round the entrance, you pan round and end up with the coffee shop. So there's the entrance, you'll notice no barriers, no go away, and the coffee shop is very popular, it's discounted, so it's used a lot by the public as well. So you're starting to have this blurring of boundaries, this porosity between public space and libraries. Maybe libraries are more dynamic. So what we've got here is the Hunk Library in North Carolina. This is a completely immersive 270-degree experience where you can listen in a library to John Donne's sermon in St. Paul's Cathedral. And not only do you experience the whole surroundings of St. Paul's Cathedral, but the noise, the echo off the walls, the sound of the chiming of the bells. So here you've got library more as laboratory. In fact, humanities people will often talk about libraries as being the equivalent of their laboratory. And to develop that theme, in Harvard, there's a collaboration between the Harvard Graduate School of Design and MetaLab. And the students there, they look at, it's a platform for library innovation. And this was a pop-up called the Library. For a couple of months, the students put on all their, displayed all their projects. Ironically, this pop-up was in a vacated bookstore underneath my offices in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the students looked at specific issues around libraries like noise and silence. And what they found is there's been a lot of anthropological and ethnographic studies about how people learn and how they need to study. And a lot of people do need hushed bubbles of shush and need that, go into that zone. But what was also known as particularly millennials and later actually can't work in silence. And so the students responded to this. So, for example, on the right-hand side, that silver shape is an inflatable pod that one of them designed that could be parachuted into a library, and you could either go and have your silence in there, or you could have it as a meeting room. And another student, she designed desks, again, that were for joint use, because we're also very social animals, with hidden speakers that were motion activated, and as you approached, they then had a bubble of white noise. Or to take it a step further, also at Harvard, there was the iLab, or the Innovation Lab. And what they did was looked at sort of more the virtual side of libraries. So what you've got here is Stack View. And this combines, you know, the serendipity of when you're browsing, whether you're browsing in a bookshop or in a library, you look at one item and, oh, something else in the vicinity catches your eye. Well, this combines that concept with then online retailers who say, people who bought this also bought that. And so they've combined these two concepts with a heat map. So say you were looking at that volume in orange. What this tells you is, oh, people who looked at that volume also, on their way to finding this, consulted these other volumes. And so they produced a heat map. So this is a combination of the virtual and of the physical. So what does all this mean for libraries? Well, I don't think it's either or. On the one hand, UNESCO have estimated that every year, over 2 million book titles are published each year. When Google were doing their Google Books project, which was aimed at digitizing every single book in the world, at that time they estimated that there were 130 million different titles in the world. Last year, it's been estimated that there were 620 million print units were sold in the world. On the other hand, in the digital universe last year, it was estimated that there were 4.4 zettabytes of data. That's 21 zeros. Massive. And this is the world, or these two different worlds, are what libraries are operating in. And I don't think it's a case of one or the other. There's a very sophisticated interplay going on between the physical spaces and the physical collections, and also the virtual space. Libraries are also in the middle of some of the biggest, most interesting societal issues. On the one hand, you've got the democratization of knowledge, which is what I would suggest the Codex Sinaiticus illustrates. Democratization of knowledge, freedom of information, freeing of information, and free information on the one hand, and then rights, copyright, the right to privacy, the right to forget, the right to be forgotten, on the other hand. And so, what does all this mean for libraries? Well, it's in this new sort of virtual space. In some ways, the virtual world is putting even more emphasis on the physical. And some of the distinguishing features between libraries are now what is special, what is unique, and what is distinct. And I would also suggest that the library as a transmitter, as the trusted transmitter of our civilization through time, is increasingly important. Thank you very much indeed.